Okay, so today we are at the Hellhole Trail, which is in Ivins, west of St. George. Um, so basically, Snow Canyon, if you guys know Snow Canyon State Park, it's that way. So we're just kind of west of there, and we're exploring, St. George is in the Mojave Desert, so we're exploring the Mojave Flora. And specifically here, the plants we're going to see are kind of things that grow. This is kind of a gulch with sort of periodic water coming through whenever there's significant rainfall. So we have some amount of vegetation that likes sort of wetter habitats here, what we call riparian vegetation. Kind of like we saw at Chuckwalla last time. So, but there's some different stuff here, so it's kind of a fun spot. All right, here's a plant for you. This is sand sage. It is in the sunflower family, the composites. And it is a close relative of big sagebrush, which is what we have a lot of up in Cedar City. So they're both in the genus Artemisia. This is Artemisia filifolia, sand sage. Filifolia, the name filifolia in Latin, fila means thread-like, and folia means leaf. So you can see here, compared to big sagebrush, if you look at the leaves of big sagebrush, they're shorter and wider, and they have 3 lobes at the tip. Sand sage has these long, thin, narrow leaves, and if you take a leaf and crush it and smell it, it has that really nice sagebrush smell. A little different from the way big sagebrush smells, but it's got kind of its own thing going on. So this is something that you'll find sort of in the upper elevation of the Mojave Desert. So when I see this plant, I know I'm kind of in like a transitional zone, like high elevation, not really high elevation, but upper elevation of the Mojave. And it also tends to grow, you can see here, I don't know how well it'll show up, but you can see it's pretty sandy soil here, right? Quite sandy, so fine. So this kind of red, fine sand around St. George, you'll often find this plant growing there. Here are last year's kind of dried flowers, dried fruits. It's hard to really see. It doesn't have the typical composite sunflower type of a flower. None of the sagebrushes really do, but you can see they're very, very small and kind of crowded into these little heads like you see in the sunflower family. So we're kind of in this gulch. Again, I mentioned when it rains, water will come through here. Over here we've got this big shrub. This plant usually doesn't get this big. Actually, there's probably a few different shrubs here kind of clustered together. This is another one that's common in the Mojave. We've actually seen it. We saw it in the Beaver Dam Mountains, but I didn't point it out because it wasn't in flower yet. But I'm going to talk about it now. So this is... this shrub is actually related to pears, or sorry, not pears, peaches, apricots, cherries, basically all these stone fruits. They're all in the genus Prunus. So this is Prunus fasciculata. The common name is desert almond. So almonds come from Prunus as well. And it's really interesting, right? Because if you know kind of like what a cherry tree looks like or a peach tree looks like, so this is a close relative, but this is kind of what that genus would do. Kind of shows like how things adapt to a desert environment, right? Because this is sort of the prunus that lives natively in the Mojave Desert. So you see how the leaves compared to like I'll put my hand for scale. You can see the leaves are much smaller than what you would see on a cherry tree, and the way it branches is kind of much denser. But if we look up close, if we see the flowers here, the flowers are just like classic rose family flowers. So these are totally what you'd expect to see for a prunus. So just like other things in the rose family, most of the things they have, I don't know how well you can see here, but they've got 5 free petals, so the petals are not fused together, and they've got lots and lots of stamens. So that's very typical of the rose family. 5 free petals, lots of stamens. And then the other thing that's really characteristic of the rose family is the flower, you have this structure called a hypanthium, also known as a floral cup. And I don't know how well you're going to be able to see it here, but let me try to get in close. Basically, at the base of the flower, there's this structure called a cup that sort of forms like this little covering around the ovary of the flower, the carpels of the flower. They're down inside this little cup. This cup is actually made from the fused bases of the petals, stamens, and sepals. So hypanthium is very characteristic of the rose family. So Prunus fasciculata, desert almond. Native people actually did eat so if you find the fruit from, later in the season or fruits from last year, you can crack them open. And there are these little tiny almond looking seeds inside there, and native people did eat them. I don't know that they're edible straight up. I think you have to do some kind of processing to them. But I'm not 100% sure, so I'll have to look into that a little bit more. Okay, so also in this gulch we have a lot of this plant, this big shrub that currently isn't really doing anything, but I want to talk about it anyway. So it hasn't even started to leaf out yet, but it's an interesting shrub nonetheless. So this is desert willow. The Latin name is Chilopsis linearis, Chilopsis, linearis, Linearis, and it's actually not a willow at all. So willows are they're salix, and willows, cottonwoods, they're all in the family Salicaceae. This is not a close relative of true willows at all. It is actually related to like catalpa, if you know that tree. That's something that grows in the southeastern U.S. natively, but it's also cultivated and planted in cities. I think there's quite a few of them, like up in Salt Lake City. And then it's also related to like trumpet creeper vine, if you know that one with the big orange flowers. So this is in the family Bignoniaceae. And but it's native to the Mojave. And you can see here, so these are the leaves from last year. So that's where the linearis part of the name Chilopsis linearis comes from. And they are very willow-like. Like if you know what willows look like, they have these long, narrow leaves. It grows in the same kind of habitat as willows, like wetter, more riparian type of environments. And these are actually the fruits. So this kind of fruit, like a dry fruit that splits open to release the seeds, we call that a capsule. I think we talked about that before. So these are last year's capsules. So you can see the fruit wall on the side here. And then inside are these seeds that have wings on them, which it helps them to disperse. Right, so you can see the wind picking up those seeds right there. And this fruit type is pretty characteristic of the family, of the trumpet creeper family or Bignoniaceae. These long, narrow fruits that kind of, these pods that split in half. It's almost like a milkweed pod, but, and the way the seeds disperse is like milkweed, but not closely related to milkweed either. So that is desert willow, Chilopsis linearis. Sorry, I accidentally pressed the volume key and that turns off the video. Like we would expect from an oak, you can see there's where the acorn was hanging out from last year. So there's that little, basically it's a bunch of little modified leaves that sit underneath the acorn. That's called a cupule. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. I was gonna say about this one. Well, here's a chance to practice some more kind of our reproductive terminology. So oaks are monoecious. Do you guys remember what that means? So dioecious, 2 houses, monoecious, 1 house. So that means that you have separate male and female flowers on the same plant. Okay. So, and I'm not seeing any of either male or female flowers coming out quite yet this year, but oaks in general, oaks across the board are all monoecious plants. The other thing that you'll notice with oaks, let me see if I can find one here. They tend to have galls on their leaves, right? So these insect-formed structures. on their leaves. I saw one earlier and I'm not seeing one now. Not seeing any now, but let me see if I can find one. All right, so there's one. It's up a little higher, so I'm kind of pulling the branch down. So that's a gall. I don't know how well you can see, but it's just growing right out of, where'd it go? I'm still kind of a noob at this whole videoing thing. So that's a gall, and it's just growing right out of the underside of a leaf. And that's pretty common on oaks. Like other plants, you can find galls maybe growing out of stems or what have you, but in oaks, it's really common for whatever reason to see them growing out of the leaves like this. These really spherical, very kind of perfectly spherical galls. Take it off here if I can. Oops. Sorry about that. There it is. So there's a little critter living inside of that structure. This is plant tissue that is grown around the insect larva inside. On the topic of galls on oaks, this is a different one, totally different kind. But again, for some reason they're always growing out of the leaves on oaks. So this is a different kind. I'm going to leave it on there. So kind of interesting. And this is a different one, different plant than the one we were looking at before. And this is actually very tree-like for a Dixie live oak. I don't know if you can see, it's growing pretty tall. They're usually pretty low and kind of form thickets. So this is a very tall tree-like one. So just to review some of the things we've seen before. Anyone recognize this one? So that is a Phedra Mormon tea. Remember the little scale-like leaves that are paired at nodes there? And then over here on the hillside, a little ways away, we've got, I don't know how well you can, that's showing up, there we go. So that's our creosote, right? Laurea tridentata. There's another one right there. And what else?
I see them.
So another thing about so these are my kids. And they just pointed this out. And so another thing with the desert almond is you'll often find these tent forming caterpillars. These are gypsy moth caterpillars, and they like things in the rose family. And you always, well not always, but you'll very frequently find them on desert almond, on Prunus fasciculata.
I can see those two in there.
Yeah, so there's just a bunch, they're kind of just like a bunch of caterpillars that hang out inside this common shelter that they build. So here's another interesting plant. This is an ash, and if you know ash trees, they're usually trees. We have a couple of ashes planted on campus at SEU. And this is kind of a shrubby version of an ash. This is something that's adapted to desert life. And it's kind of interesting for an ash. So it's called single leaf ash. So the name comes from the fact that ashes usually have compound leaves. In other words, right, each leaf is divided into multiple separate segments or leaflets. And here, in this species, the leaves have basically secondarily evolved to be just one simple leaf. And sometimes you can actually find, let me see if I can see any here. Sometimes you can find some that are kind of split into two leaflets, but I don't see any right now. But it's actually pretty common if you just kind of look at them. So anyway, so this is single leaf ash. It's much shrubbier than your typical ash tree, but like other ashes, it has some of the other characteristics in common. It's got opposite phyllotaxy. So do you see that? How here's a leaf and here's a leaf, and they're opposite each other on the stems. Actually, wait, no. So this leaf and this leaf are this leaf and this leaf are an opposite pair here. So the leaves are just starting to flush, so it's actually kind of hard to see the phyllotaxy a little bit. But here's a pair. That's one leaf. That's the other leaf. So see how they're opposite each other? There's two leaves that are node. Okay, so it's just breaking bud here. And like other ashes, single leaf ash. Oh, let me give you the Latin name because it's actually kind of interesting. Single leaf ash is Fraxinus anomala. So Fraxinus is the ash genus. Anomala means, right, that it's anomalous in that because it has simple leaves rather than compound leaves. So that's what makes it different from other ashes. Like other ashes, though, the plant is dioecious. So they're separate male and female plants. And so here's the flowers just starting to open up. Can anyone guess whether those are male or female flowers? So this is a male plant. These are staminate flowers, so flowers that only have stamens. I don't know how well you can see. So these are just these big clusters or bunches of stamens, basically just staminate flowers. And then the other thing you'll notice about these flowers, right? They're basically just the stamens. There's no, I mean, there are petals in there, but they're just very, very small and not colorful. So if you were to guess how that's pollinated, what would you say? If a plant makes flowers that have lots and lots of pollen producing parts, but no petals, basically, right? Nothing to attract pollinators. So if you guess that it's wind pollinated, you are right. So ashes are, in general, are wind pollinated. So single leaf ash, and we're basically, there's a good number of these sort of just upslope from the actual gulch or arroyo here. So they kind of grow on sort of this hillsides slightly away from the more wetter area. Single leaf ash. All right, so this big herbaceous plant here, right? You see this thing growing in these clumps. So this is, it's called Canaigre. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It's Canaigre, Canaigre, I think. So this is an herb, right? We talk about plants being either herbs or woody, right? So here's our creosote, a woody plant. And so woody things would be like shrubs and trees. Everything else are herbaceous. They don't really have significant woody tissues. So this plant it almost looks like weedy to me, like it doesn't belong here, but it is a native. It's in the buckwheat family. Along with Eriogonum, which we've seen but haven't really talked about very much. So that's in that same family. So that's the buckwheat family, Polygonaceae. And so this is Canaigre, I don't know, Rumex hymenocephala. And one characteristic of the buckwheat family that's usually a really good, helpful characteristic is if you look at the base of the leaves, you'll see this kind of papery sheath that encircles the stem. You see that right there? So that's usually a pretty good clue. If you see like an herbaceous plant with this kind of overall look to it, and you see that papery sheath, that's called an ochrea, O-C-H-R-E-A. That's a pretty good characteristic of the buckwheat family. And you'll notice the leaves, right? The stalk of the leaf or the petiole. See how rhubarb-like it looks? So rhubarb is also in this family, and these plants are edible, especially the younger leaves. So settlers would eat this. One of the common names for it is miner's lettuce. So, and I haven't ever tried it, but apparently it's kind of similar to rhubarb. So that is Rumex hymenocephalus or Canaigre.
Flowers.
Oh, are there flowers? Oh, okay. We've got some flowering over here on this one. Oh yeah, here we go. Didn't even see that. So that's what the flowers look like. They're not quite open yet, most of them. Let's see here. So these small flowers, small clusters. Oh, we've got some that are open there. Over there, hold on. So here's some flowers of that Rumex. They're actually pretty much done when I look at them up close. So these are sort of what flowers look like in this family. They're generally white to kind of pinkish, greenish, not super colorful. They have usually kind of a lot of petals. It looks like these ones have 3. There they are. These are actually mature flowers, and looks like they stay pretty closed at maturity. So there you go. All right, here's another one with kind of more flowers going on. So you can see these flowers are completely opened up, and this is pretty cool. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this here, but they're just producing tons of pollen. Do you see that? The pollen kind of falling out when I shake the inflorescence all over my fingers. So let me zoom in a little bit here. So you can see those 3 kind of greenish petals, and then you can see all those stamens in there. And if we find one that's starting to set fruit, let me look here. Setting fruit. See, it's kind of like a little pyramid shape in the middle there, so that'll grow bigger and bigger. So those are the carpels, and that's pretty common in this family for the fruit to have 3 sides to it, like kind of a pyramid shape. So I'm kind of up on top of the gully here. You can see where this sort of ephemeral creek flows through, just whenever there's enough rainfall. And up top here, so we're back up into our sand sage, right? So there's sand sage. There's our Utah juniper, like we saw at the Hellhole Trail last week. And then here's another one that we've seen in a couple of spots. So we saw this shrub actually at in the Beaver Dam Mountains the first week we went out. But I didn't talk about it then. But I'm going to talk about it now because it's actually another important, common sort of foundational shrub, just meaning numerically very abundant in sort of the upper elevation Mojave. So this shrub is blackbrush. The Latin name is Coleogyne ramosissima, and this is in the rose family as well, kind of like our desert almond. But unlike desert almond, it has really weird characteristics for the rose family. So for one thing, the phyllotaxy, the branching, is opposite. So I don't know how well you can see it there, right? Opposite branching. So the leaves are very tightly clustered together, so it can be kind of hard to see. But it's opposite branching. In other words, like everywhere there's a leaf or a branch at a node, there's another one coming out at the other side of the node. Kind of like what we saw with the single leaf ash, right? So similar to a lot of our desert shrubs, the leaves are really, really tiny, just very reduced. And then the other thing, so I think it's the name blackbrush just comes from this sort of, the green of the leaves is kind of a pretty dark green. So when you see a bunch of them against a hillside, it gives it kind of, there's a bunch of them up here. It just kind of, I don't know if that's where the name blackbrush comes from, just because they're a little darker. When we look at the flowers, so we don't actually have flowers opened up yet on this, but we can see fruits from last year. Okay. And the flowers / fruits, let me find a good one here. They're pretty weird for the rose family. They're pretty atypical. So I don't know how well y'all are going to be able to see it, but do you see how the flowers are in parts of 4 instead of 5? So usually the rose family has 5 meris flowers, meaning there's 5 petals, 5 sepals. Stamens are in multiples of 5. So these are 4 meris flowers. And the flowers actually lack petals completely. So what you're looking at here, those parts that are open, those are the sepals. And when the flowers are fresh and opened up, what you'll see this yellow, it looks like they have yellow petals, but it's actually the inner wall of the sepals that you're looking at there. So that is pretty unusual in the rose family. And so these are last year's. Again, you just have these kind of dry capsules left over after the seeds have dispersed. Okay, so that's blackbrush, Coleogyne ramosissima, common, important, abundant shrub of the upper Mojave. Okay, one last one because I just found something in flower. See if I can get it to focus. Oh, here we go. Let's do it this way. So this plant, so we got this little herbaceous plant. This is a member of the mustard family. Its name is Streptanthella longirostris. And there isn't really, the common name for it is longbeak Streptanthella. So the longirostris part of its Latin name means long beak or long nose. And so this is one that you will see in the Mojave, and you'll also find it up at Cedar City elevation. So there's a good population of it at the Thunderbird Gardens Trail outside of town. And so the mustard family is pretty well represented in our flora in southern Utah. And the way you can recognize the mustard family is if you see flowers with 4 petals, 4 free petals. So they are actually free, so they're kind of in this little tube formed by the sepal. So those are the sepals around the outside. And then you've just got the petals sticking out at the top. So there's 4 petals. And the name of the mustard family is Brassicaceae, but the traditional name for it is crucifery, which means cross-bearing. And so you can see like the flowers when in this family, they tend to form an X like this at the top. And so that's where that cross-bearing comes from. But the way to really recognize for sure, without a doubt, that you're looking at the mustard family is if you see 6 stamens inside, right? So the pollen-producing part of the flower. If you see 6 of them, and 4 of them are long and 2 of them are short, so 6 stamens in a 4+2 arrangement, that's how you know you're looking at the mustard family, Brassicaceae or crucifery. And then overall, just the general look of the plant, like they're usually herbs in this family. The leaves often are simple, but kind of with teeth on them, stuff like that. Not always, right? There's a lot of variations, a pretty decently big family. But there's kind of this overall mustard family look. Oftentimes what you have in this family is you'll have a stalk of flowers where at the top of the stalk you'll have the immature flowers that are still in bud, and then further down you'll get the more mature flowers, and sometimes at the very base, actually we can see it here, the older flowers, and you'll even have fruits maturing like all together on the same plant, right? So they kind of mature from the bottom toward the top. That's a very Brassicaceae. And at the top, the inflorescence is often kind of like this flat-topped little cluster like this. So Streptanthella longirostris, longbeak Streptanthella, member of the mustard family. Here's some kind of a fungus underneath a sand sage shrub. This really sandy environment here. We are at the Hellhole Trail in Ivins, Utah. Check this out though. So I thought it was full of sand in here, but I think these are spores. I think those are all spores. I'm not totally sure. Yeah, those are spores. It's crazy. See that? Okay, I'm gonna have to double check the ID on this one, but I for sure know the family. So this is in the poppy family, Papaveraceae. Just the overall look of the leaves, and then you can see this little tiny flower in here. So I believe this is a pygmy poppy which would be Eschscholzia minutum, if I remember correctly. So you see you've got that flower with just one carpel in the middle. Another way we know that it's the poppy family is if you break off a leaf, it oozes this yellow latex. That's pretty poppy family characteristic. Look at that, just beading up out of there. So I'm gonna have to double check the ID, like I said, but Papaveraceae for sure. The look of the leaves, that's another. So these leaves that are really finely divided and sort of what we call ternate in sort of three main parts overall. It's very poppy family characteristic. The yellow flowers are commonly yellow, not always. So I will double check the species ID on this one. All right, back down in the gulch again. This is one more that I was going to talk about. So here is one shrub. Basically what we're seeing here is that it has started to flower before it's leafing out, or there's just barely leaves coming out, but it has nice mature flowers all over it. So let's go ahead and take a look. So this is skunk bush sumac. It's got these tiny yellow flowers. So just to get some sense of scale, here they are with my hand behind them. So you can see, let me zoom in a bit here. Little yellow petaled flowers. There's 5 free petals. This is actually in the same family as poison oak, poison ivy, and mangoes, cashews. So they're all in we'd say the mango family, the poison ivy family, or the Latin name for it is Anacardiaceae. And we can see just these little leaves just kind of getting started here. Let's see if we can see much detail on them. So they are trilobate leaves, or tripartite. In other words, split into their compound leaves split into 3 parts. I actually see one over here with some of last year's leaves, so maybe we'll go over there and look at that one. So these really nice yellow flowers, though, kind of coming out before the leaves. So that's skunk bush sumac, or Ruth aromatica, variety trilobata is actually, if you want to get into the technical details of the Latin name. Here's one that has not really started doing anything, that has leaves from last year. And this one actually shows some of the interesting variation in this species, because sometimes the leaves will be separate into 3 leaflets, like a poison oak or poison ivy. And some of them will just be simple leaves. So this individual here has just the regular simple leaves. See that? So it's kind of 3 lobes, but it's not split into 3 separate leaflets. And it looked like the ones over here on this shrub were the ones that are actually more. Here we go. Here's one here. That are actually in 3. I don't know how well you can see that they're 3 separate leaflets from last year's leaf. So you'll see variations, and in whether it's a simple leaf or a 3-lobed leaf or a 3-part leaf, and they'll be right next to each other like that some of the time. Skunk bush sumac.